One sport, millions of voices. This is Rugby Unity.
This is Rugby Unity. I am David Pembroke, and Eddie Jones, I will soon be asking you a question that I don't think you've ever been asked before. But before we get into that, how are you and what has caught your eye this week?
Good, thanks, Pemby. Obviously, the Lions selection's been the big story this week. Good squad picked by Andy Farrell. Good, hard-working team. Not much conjecture about who's in, who's out. A couple of borderline decisions. Probably from my point of view, the guy who I think is probably the most unlucky is Jack Willis, who's playing for Toulouse, who's absolutely been outstanding in Europe. But given that he'll join the tour late, they've decided they can't afford to take him.
So just go through some of the selections, some of the balance of the team, thinking back to the episode last week about how Andy Farrell will be assembling the team and developing the team. From a forward pack point of view, what would you say are the highlights of the pack, and what can the world of rugby expect from the Lions pack?
Well, I think it'll be traditionally the Lions have got a big tight five, and they'll have that. Yeah, I'm really pleased to see someone like Ellis Genge. If you remember, we took him to Australia as an absolute rookie in 2016. He was raw as anything. Had been in a bit of trouble on and off the field. Has matured into a really good test prop. On the other side, Furlong has been out for a long time injured. And it's whether he can really recover his dynamic form, because at his best, he's the best tight end in the world. But Will Stewart, again, a young guy who's come through England, has now got a strong consistency about his scrummaging. Second row strong with the Itoje and McCarthy from Ireland. They'll be highly competitive in the lineouts, and they've both got good work rate players. The back row is an interesting one. Probably missing a traditional, really strong ball runner apart from Conan, the Irish 8. They'll miss Doris, who's a work rate, glue type player. But, Curry's has been in good form and gives you a point of difference around the breakdown.
And the backs?
Back's interesting. Gibson Park, for those people who follow Super Rugby will remember him as a player for the Hurricanes in Auckland. He was a good player without being absolutely outstanding. But now he's turned himself into the best halfback in the Northern Hemisphere, apart from DuPont. Clever use of the blind side, great pass selection, robust defender. He's a really strong player. 10, Pendergast got left out from Ireland, who's, in the Six Nations showed himself to be a player that has, really good moments in a game. Probably missed out because of his performance against Northampton in the semi-final of the European Cup. And so then you've got a straight shootout between Finn Russell, who's the more experienced, former sort of maverick type 10, who's now matured into a pretty solid test 10, and Finn Smith, who's, 21 going on 55. He plays, makes good decisions, calm player, ordered kicking games, got really good order in his thinking. And then you've got the mercurial Marcus Smith who can do something off the bench for you.
So potentially a very good side there, captained by Maro Itoje. And I thought I would bring this book along with me to go back to something that you wrote about Maro Itoje, because some of obviously the story and the criticism, I suppose, of you and your assessment of Itoje being appointed as captain, because you said this in your book, and this is the context. It says, Maro Itoje has what it takes. He has an enormous work ethic and an intense desire to be at his best. Maro is at it the whole time. But there are other facets of his role that require work. There were a lot of calls for him to be named captain of the Lions in South Africa in 2021. Alan Wynne-Jones rightly got the job instead. That seems sensible to me. I might be wrong, but I am not sure Maro is a future England captain. He is going to be one of the great players, but Maro is very inward looking. He drives himself rather than anyone else. He doesn't usually influence people off the field. Maro might be able to develop this skill and relate to people even more effectively, but he has work to do. He has the intelligence to do it, and so no door is closed to him. So to me, that seems that you were saying you didn't think at the time he could do it.
I was 100% right. When was that written? I can't be furthermore right there. That he has work to do. He's done work, and like every player, mate. Like players aren't statues. They're not set in stone. But at that stage, I don't think he was ready. But, obviously he's evolved. He did a good job with England in the last Six Nations. Particularly I think in a couple of games he probably out-captained the opposition. And now's a great opportunity for him to show how much growth he's made. So, yeah.
Well, exactly. And the reason I pulled that together is not to defend you as such, but to put comments in their context. And as you say, if you read that's probably a pretty reasonable assessment of the journey that Maro took. And the other thing that you did also mention in the book about Maro Itoje, Owen Farrell and Tom Curry, that they were the exceptional players in your squad that you never had to worry about because they were the ones who were at it all the time.
Yeah, no. I think, obviously how comments are taken and put into a certain context is one of the most interesting parts of media. But I'm really pleased for Maro that he's got the opportunity. I'm really pleased that he has developed. And I think, my experience with most players is the really good ones keep growing and they add things to their game. They go from not being a very good captain to being a good captain. You were involved with John Eales, and I think at the start of his career, he really struggled as captain. I think he had quite an unflattering nickname at the start of his career as captain, and he evolved into one of the best captains of all times.
He did.
So I can't see how those comments can be taken as anything but positive for Maro.
But, mate, you're the Snidely Whiplash of world rugby, so you're Mr. Black Hat. So, anyway, that's fine. I just want to congratulate the Lions for the live broadcast of the announcement of the team. Were you able to catch it?
I don't watch any media, mate. Zero.
You didn't watch it? Okay. Well, it was excellent. It was a budget affair. Like it wasn't a high glitz, high glamour. They were able to use the technology. They were able to use the phones of the players to be able to go around to the different countries to identify some of the players. Andy Farrell, I thought, was outstanding, and I really hope he brings that personality, and I hope he brings the performance that he had on the night, because it was exceptional. But really the key for me, and I think it's the key for rugby as it looks to grow and secure its future prosperity, they put the fans at the heart of the event. And there were 2,000 fans in the O2 Arena who were able to enjoy this occasion. And it was a great innovation and a big step forward to the way that rugby talks about things. And I hope that World Rugby was perhaps paying some attention, because I think there's an opportunity later in the year at the World Rugby Awards, which are often held in Monaco. It's a black tie event for about 200 or 300 people. It's invitation only, and that's our night of nights. Now, really, I'm sure that we can do better than that. So why not have a week celebration in London, have a big event at the O2 Arena, celebrate the 135 countries who are involved in rugby, celebrate the great athletes who are involved, and really get in behind integrating rugby into music, entertainment, culture, and have a big celebration that would be the launch of the Nations Cup and do it in the middle of London rather than do it as a closed-off event in Monaco for those who are invited. And I think this is the key, that we need to move fans to the centre of the game so as that we can get more people in more countries caring more about the game.
And obviously, making the World Rugby Awards at the end of the season into a fan events, worth some consideration, but it's not really going to change the way people look at rugby. I think it's a good idea.
That's not going to turn it around overnight, but it is one thing. It is one thing that we can do. And go back to the beginning of the Brumbies when we started them. We had no money. And so what did we do? Every day we just tried to be a little bit smarter and a little bit more connected with people. And ultimately we were able to connect with them in a way that we got them to behave that helped us to build those crowds over time. So you don't just click your fingers. You work hard at it, but you work collaboratively as a global community to try to turn this sport and to realise the future prosperity of the game over time.
Pemby, apart from the Lions selection, what caught your eye in rugby this week, mate?
Probably what caught my eye this week was the financial results of the New Zealand Rugby Union, where for the third year in a row, they've recorded a fairly substantial loss in the order of $19.5 million. It's the third year in a row that they have lost money. And when we consider the future prosperity of rugby union around the world, the All Blacks are the number one brand. And we, as a collective, as a global game, we need the All Blacks to be thriving. And I think 3 losses in a row is challenging. I think it's troubling. And I think we need, hopefully there is a pathway to profitability. But I'm a little bit also concerned about some of the investments they're making in their NZR Plus platform. Yes, there's global reach. Yes, there's global growth. They were talking about over 1 billion impressions on their platforms, but they're impressions. They're not dollars. And I think the content game is a very, very difficult game. And so turning that traffic into money is really where the opportunity and both the challenge is going to be. So that was something that concerns me this week with New Zealand, and I do hope that there is a way that they can turn it around in the next couple of years, which indeed could be challenging because they're coming up to renegotiate their television agreement, and there is no competitive tension in the New Zealand television market anymore. So they may find that they won't get as much money as they did last time.
And what's the reason for the losses, mate?
Well, there is a couple of things. One is that investment that they've made or continued to make in their content platform, this NZR Plus. It's the third year of a 4-year planned investment of around $40 million. There was some hedging losses or currency losses that they had related to their sponsorship with Ineos. But it's probably more that investment in this content platform that I think is a bit concerning, because we do have an example that recently in Australia, in the Premier League or the A-League in Australia, they followed a similar path around building out a content platform, a direct-to-consumer platform. And after 3 years and a reported $30 million worth of investment in Australia, in March of this year, they turned it off. They retained the content, obviously, because they had it there, but they decided that there wasn't a pathway to revenue. So I just have my concerns that that investment in those union-based platforms. And look, there's a lot of great content on the NZR Plus platform, but to me, it lacks tension. It lacks diversity, and it's just really all about the All Blacks and New Zealand Rugby Union. So I just wonder whether or not there is enough there for the 285,000 subscribers that they now have, that when they try to turn that onto Let's Pay, how many of those 285,000 will start to pay for it? So that's a risk and a concern. And And yeah, I think there needs to be, more ways to raise money out of that iconic brand because, again, the future sustainability of rugby union around the world, the All Blacks are our number one brand. So we need them to be firing and we need them to be exceptional.
So when you say it lacks tension, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's all sunshine and lollipops, It's all great news. It's all, here's another great story. There's another great story. I think... there's a framework in storytelling called the hero's journey by Joseph Campbell. And in any sort of story, you need, bad things to happen. You need challenges to be set in front of people. You need people to overcome those challenges. And I think too much of the content for me is it's just too much good news and not enough tension. And indeed, not enough diversity. Like the All Blacks play the game against other people, but there is no content there that explains who their competitors are, or delves into some of those stories, or delves into some of the the challenges that they might have. And that's another thing that's sort of grinding my gears a bit this week. When the Kiwis, when the New Zealand Rugby put out this announcement, the headline was record revenues of $285 million. And it wasn't until about the 8th paragraph of the release that they said, oh, and by the way, we've lost, almost 20 million New Zealand dollars. Well, to me, the analogy of that is a match report. It's like the headline says, All Blacks set record for line breaks, and then the 8th paragraph tells you that you lost the game. The problems of the game are not going to be solved by World Rugby or by New Zealand Rugby or by Australia. It's going to be solved by the people and the actions of the people. And if they want to build trust and they want to build confidence with people, they've got to be direct. Because at the moment, and I've just calculated, well, these are some numbers. So New Zealand, 19.5 million. The French look like they'll lose about 30 million when it's tallied up this year. Scotland, 11.3 million pounds loss. Ireland, 18.4 million pounds loss. Wales, 7.5 million pounds loss. RFU, 34.4 million pounds loss. Australia, 36.8 million Australian dollars loss. Like, at what point do we call this as a crisis? At what point do people say, hey, global rugby community, we are in a bit of trouble here and we're going to have to work together to work through these issues? So I just think it's time for a bit of straight talking, a bit of plain talking, get rid of the management speak, get rid of the gobbledygook, talk to people about what the problems are. And this is the opportunity that Brett Robinson has when he now releases the strategic plan for World Rugby. They've got to get rid of all of that. They've got to get rid of all the good news. And let's be straight about where we're starting from, because we have this wonderful game. We have this wonderful spread. We have 500 million fans around the world. Surely we can collectively help to create a sustainable game. I believe that in my heart that it's there, but the only way that that'll ever happen is if people talk direct with each other and they're straight with each other. And I think this sort of patrician view of, oh, yes, we've got it all covered and, you're okay and, we'll just leave it to us. No, that's all over. That's finished. We need to work together if we're going to secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world. Homily ended.
Good. Well, that was a pretty good go from you. So what was your second biggest thing for the week?
We're not talking rugby, we're building it. Rugby Unity.
It struck me that we really need to explain to people why is it that the game means so much to you, Eddie Jones, and so much to me, David Pembroke. So, Eddie Jones, this might be a question you've never been asked before, but why do you love the game of rugby?
Oh, it made me think, mate, when you asked me the question. One of my first training sessions in rugby, it was with Clovelly under 13s, and we had this coach called Paul Pemberton. He was a taxi driver, red-headed guy, and he'd always come to training. He'd have a shirt with a pocket, and it always caught my attention, his pocket. Because remember, like 50 or 60 years ago, people used to carry a stationary shop in their pocket. You know, they'd
Yep.
have a red pen, blue pen, pencil, notepad. And he'd always come to training and he'd be the most positive guy in the world. And we had this motto, play to win, learn to lose. And I still remember that as clear as today. And he was just an infectious character and he made you love the game. And the importance of a player's first coach is can't be underestimated in any sport, but particularly in rugby, which is a particularly complex game. Because the other thing I remember about rugby as an early age was how much more enjoyable rugby league training was than rugby union training, because we used to practice the skills all the time in rugby league, whereas in rugby we were training to get organised because it's such a complex game. And for young kids, you don't want to be organised. You want to play and practice your skills. Like in rugby league, you're tackling, you're carrying, you're passing all the time, but rugby's got that special spirit, and Paul Pemberton encompassed that spirit. He was a guy that just loved the game, loved teaching the game, and made you want to come to training, even though training wasn't that great. I still wanted to go to training.
And what about the sport itself? What was it that drew you to rugby and drew you to the enjoyment of the game?
Well, the thing I probably look back and enjoy about the game, and I've never really thought about it that much, is that it's a physically tough game. And you look at rugby league's the same, physically tough game. But in rugby, there are so many different ways to win the game. And that's the intriguing part of it. And when you're playing the game, it's finding, right, are we winning the scrum? Are we winning the line out? Are we winning the breakdown? Are we winning the aerial contest? And be able to find a way to win. And with 15 players on the field to think the same way, you just think in a game of rugby, one thing happens, and on the ground, 15 players can have 15 different ideas. And you need a strong leader to put one idea in place and then everyone to follow that. Because, yeah, you listen to the commentators, they're watching the game with the hindsight of replays, and very rarely they can pick what area of the game is winning the situation. So it's the complexity in this physically tough game that's always really caught my eye. And for you, mate, what do you love about it?
Well, pretty similar. When I go back to playing at school and playing with your mates and learning the game and learning the complexity of the game, because I'm like you, I played rugby league when I was a kid, but went to boarding school, they played rugby. And that learning of the game, the physical challenge, the tactical challenge, the mental challenge, playing with your friends, as you say, learning to win, learning to lose, learning to listen, all of those life skills that I think have helped me in my life, really, and it's part of my identity as part of the game. But probably the other part of the reason why I love the game so much is that I think back to some experiences I had as a younger person, and really they go to the hospitality and the friendliness and the inclusiveness of the sport. And I remember I was in the New South Wales country under-16 team, and we went to the Australian Championships in Perth, and we were hosted by the Cottesloe Rugby Union club, and we were billeted on the floor of their clubhouse. But you couldn't imagine how much fun this was, that there were, 30 great friends, all, from different parts of New South Wales that had gathered together to play in this tournament. We had these wonderful hosts. And also the other part of it was this travel, this being in another place that I'd actually never been before. And I'll never forget seeing the sun go down over the ocean for the first time and just thinking to myself, I'm in a different place. That is something I've never seen before. I could not be having more fun. And I'm being hosted by these incredibly generous people at the Cottesloe Rugby Union Club. So I know that had a really big impact on me when I was a kid. And another memory that I have of, again, this notion of combining hospitality and inclusiveness and generosity was a university tour. I was lucky enough I think it was 1984 at the University of New South Wales. We went on a world tour. Now, it was extraordinary. We went to Los Angeles, Las Vegas, New York, We flew across to Rome, jumped in a bus, and then toured through places like Civitavecchia, Calvisano. We went up into Geneva, down across into France. We played in Narbonne, in Limoges, in Paris, and then across to England, Oxford, Bristol, and then on the way home, we went via Hawaii. But to discover that there was this global community of people who were just like us, who were enjoying the game in just the same way that we were enjoying the game, but also to have that hospitality wherever we went. Even I'll never forget the night in Calvisano when they hosted us after the game. We couldn't speak Italian. They couldn't speak much English, but it didn't really matter because as the night went on, the spirit of the game sort of took hold of this room. And it was just like it would have been at the Green Hut at University of New South Wales. And I think that's the specialness of the game, and it's that trying to capture that sense of friendliness, that sense of inclusion, that sense of generosity. I think that's part of the solution as we move forward. Now, how you scale that intimacy, how you scale that sense of belonging, I think that's part of the challenge and hopefully something that we can address in the weeks ahead. But they're the things that made me love the game. And obviously I was lucky enough to get plenty of opportunity in the professional game as well to participate in teams. But when I go back to why I love the game, I go back to my childhood. And it's interesting when I ask you the question, you go back to the same place.
And there's plenty of green huts around the world, mate.
Well, there are.
No, that's true. Everyone's got a green hut. Every rugby club's got a green hut. And it also, the other thing that strikes me about rugby, having lived in England for a number of years and attending Premier League games, you go to a Premier League game, Arsenal will be playing someone. I went to a few Arsenal games, and the fans had to leave the ground at different times, and you'd walk out of the ground and there'd be policemen on horses all lined up anticipating trouble, and the home fans leave first, then the away fans leave. And you see in rugby, and particularly, it reminds me 2003 World Cup, 2019 World Cup, that the fans go to the game. You've got these mixed group of fans from different countries, and they're playing for keeps here, aren't they? Like, this is the biggest game for the 4 years, and it's a tough game, and you get beaten, you're not happy, but they all come out and they're all having a good time. They're all enjoying themselves. So you go to the train station, they're all there, like South Africa in 2015 when Japan beat South Africa. At the train station, the South African fans lined up and allowed the Japanese fans to go first. Now, if that was football, they'd be fighting each other. It'd be World War III. Here we go. And that's the difference of rugby. Even at the top end of the game, we still get that sort of camaraderie that we're in it together. Yeah, we want to win, but we're in it together in such a difficult game. Because the thing we're always fighting in rugby, it's a bloody difficult game, mate. Like, it's a difficult game to referee. It's a difficult game for the TMOs to referee. And it's a difficult game for players to understand.
But that's part of its appeal as well, isn't it? The complexity of the sport is why we enjoy the game as much as we do. And again, I know as we go forward through this program, we're going to try to address some of those on-field and off-field issues. So it really is about trying to think about how do we capture that essence? How do we capture that, that part of our identity and make it more attractive to more people around the world so as that we can grow the game? And I'm not sure I've got the answers today as to exactly how we do that. I think there is some things to be done at a foundation level. I think there's things to be done higher up. But to your point about more green huts around the world, my daughter at the moment is on a gap year over in the UK at the Cheam School. And the school is connected in some way to the Newbury Rugby Club. And exactly what you say, they have welcomed my daughter and her friends into that club. They're playing down there. They're having a great time down there. And it's that universality of that experience that you see everywhere that is the absolute strength of the sport, and that it does have to be part of the growth of the game, because that's what makes us different. And so how do we tell that story in such a way that makes people want to sample the sport, want to participate in part of the sport? Because as you said before, as you know, at those World Cup events, we see it writ large, but what we need to do is to grab that and take it and distribute it more widely, so we get more people engaged more often in more countries, so that they care more.
So what we're lacking in the game is that connection between people experiencing that spirit of the game, but then going out of their way to attend rugby games that probably in a lot of ways don't mean a lot to them. For instance, if you're living in Sydney and you're not a public school guy like you, right? So, we've got a nice balance here, mate.
Nothing wrong with that.
Public. No, you're private school, mate. Nice private school, nice.
You're well balanced because you've got a chip on both shoulders, but that's okay.
No, that's all right. Well, you got to keep them, mate. You got to keep them. You got to keep fighting mate, the fight.
I remember the war's over, mate. Anyway, that's fine.
one of the things that reminds me about rugby at Matraville High, we used to have to go out before training and pick up the stones off the field. So Mark Ella, one of the greatest players that's ever played the game, before he had to train, he had to pick up the stones so he could train, because they couldn't afford proper dirt to put on top of it, and they got dirt, I think, from the jail, and it had a few things in it. But that's the lovable thing about rugby, isn't it? And that produces one of the best players ever seen in the game. Like, imagine Mark Ella playing now, mate. Imagine him playing rugby now. It'd be inconceivable how good he would be. He would just dominate the game. He'd be Richie Mwanga and Bowden Barrett put together.
Yeah. No doubt about that. So actually, what was that like growing up with the Ella brothers? Because I know you did play with them from quite a young age. And were they as extraordinary from a young age as they were as they grew through?
My first memory of Mark, I remember, you do your times table, right? 1 times 1, 2 times 2, 3 times 3. And every day you get tested, right? You go through the week. I always remember Mark was the sharpest in his times table. Glenn wasn't so sharp, but Mark was sharp, right? And then you played any sort of sport with those guys. Like, we played cricket and rugby league at primary school, then we played cricket and rugby union at high school. And they would just dominate every game you played. And they do it with a smile on their face. It'd be fun. But Mark always had that more competitive instinct. Glenn had plenty of natural talent. Gary was a late developer. And you just understood how good players can be. Like, Mark could do anything in the game. We played a rugby league game at last year primary school. It was we won the South Sydney knockout, 5-7. We won it, so you go to the state knockout. And we were playing against, I think, maybe St. George, who were far too good for us. I remember Mark just taking over the game, tackling everything, running everything. And even at that age, at 12, he was a cut above everyone. And it's one of the saddest things, mate, that he ended his career at 24.
Yeah.
Like, one of the greatest talents in the world. Imagine Messi if he ended at 24, because that's what Mark was like.
Yeah. And again, it's interesting, isn't it? As I mentioned before, we're in the memories business and the connection business. And my memory of the Ella brothers was when they were selected to play in first grade for Randwick against Northern Suburbs. And I was in the Sydney grade competition, and I was on holidays up in Coolangatta, and that was back in the days that the games were on the ABC at 3:00 in the afternoon.
Gordon Bray.
I don't think Gordon. No, this was probably before Gordon's time, because it was the late 70s, and I think Gordon might have come a little bit after. I think Trevor Allen might have been calling the game. But I will never forget watching that game and watching these three brothers play together. And Norths were quite a good team, but they had no idea how to deal with these, with the attacking skills of those people. And I remember where I was sitting. I remember where the sun was shining. And I remember watching the game that day and turning it off and thinking, I have just seen the future of Australian rugby. This is special. And it goes back to this idea of how do we create more memories? How do we create more emotion? How do we create more connection? Because through that, I think there's the pathway to sustainability.
But, jokes aside about, different class levels and all of that, the great thing is those kids were able to come from nowhere, completely non-rugby background and make it in rugby. And I think, that's one of the things that's probably not emphasised enough in rugby. You go to most countries in the world and there's a class structure to rugby that's still there. Like in Japan, it's the major universities that control the game. In Australia, it's the private schools. And probably New Zealand's the outlier there, that it's very much the game of the people. But in most countries, there's an underlying class structure that sort of cuts off parts of the population's access to rugby in a very subtle way.
Right. So how do you see that? How does that happen? That they're not welcome, that there's not that inclusivity?
Well, I think, whoever's in charge tends to like, if you're a redbird, mate, and you go into a park and there's redbirds, you go to a redbird. You don't go to the bluebirds or you don't go to the whitebirds. And that's what happens in rugby. Whoever's in charge tends to look after the people that they were brought up with. That's the reality of it. And that then tends to sustain the power base of the game. And whereas other games who have become more commercial have opened themselves up. You look at what's happening in rugby league in Australia. All the best rugby league young players are now going to the big public schools, aren't they? They're going to the big private schools.
Yeah.
They're going to the big private schools in Sydney, to get a good education and to set them up to play NRL well.
All right, we'll head off for another week. But listen, thank you very much. And as I have said, we are so keen that you, the audience, the third voice, has your say about what you believe needs to be done to secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world. We are on all of the socials, and there is an email address in the show notes if you'd like to reach out to us to talk to us about topics that you'd like us to address, people you'd like us to interview. We're up for all sorts of suggestions, so please do that. Thanks very much to Eddie Jones for joining us once again.
Thanks, Pemby.
So remember, be kind to each other. We'll see you next week. My name's David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.